Hello. Good
Hi.
afternoon from London. Good evening and good morning to wherever you are dialing in from. Welcome to Women in Hospitality Travel Tech, WHTT. We're presenting Diversity and Inclusion Talks, episode number 6. So thank you all so much for joining. My name is Devi. I'm head of diversity and inclusion here at WHTT. So today is our last episode. Now, episode number 6 is all about leading through allyship. Our panelists will be in discussion for around 40 minutes, and I will be involving questions from you, our audience. Right, I'd like to now welcome and introduce our amazing panelists for today. So, I first have Evelyn Hamilton. So, welcome, Evelyn. So Evelyn is a Swedish citizen with British origins. Now, she's always been adventurous and has loved to travel and meet people from all different walks of life. She started working in the travel industry, in fact, well over 12 years ago, and has been working within bid writing and business development for over 20 years across various organizations. She's currently at BCD as the global bid and project manager. She's also a proud recipient of the GBTA's Ladder Program Mentee Award for 2019 and BCD's Circle of Excellence Award. Both are celebrations of her achievement as voted by a panel of her peers. Evelyn is actually a regular social media content writer on LinkedIn, so if you haven't seen her work, do check it out, and enjoys the vibrant conversations that occur through writing articles and posts on thoughts which range from the future of travel, sustainability, remote working, and mentorship. Really great to have you with us today, Evelyn. We then have Patricia. Great to have you here with us, Patricia.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So, Patricia is a Brazilian living in Luxembourg. What a fantastic mix, Patricia. And a senior tax global mobility consultant by chance and a D&I expert and advocate by choice. In almost 15 years of her career throughout different organizations, she has found out to be naturally and genuinely passionate about people and their interactions. Her curiosity has given her the chance to live and work across 3 different countries, experiment 5 languages, and get to know various different cultures. She's an animal lover at heart, lucky to have a husband that's also a chef, who motivates and helps her to believe and pursue all her dreams. Great to have you with us, Patricia. And we now are going to be introducing Paul. Paul, so lovely to have you with us all the way from the US.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Paul, for the past 10 years, has been focused on driving high value decision making through powerful analysis and concise project management within the travel industry. He started his travel career as an analyst, eventually rising to lead a team of consultant and analysts. And one of the most highly regarded travel consulting firms in North America. Paul is actually currently managing the air relations business intelligence team at Internova Travel Group. So this was formerly Travel Leaders Group, where he works to develop the strategies for commercial airline agreements across the network of the agencies. Now, Paul also cherishes the opportunity to work with many of the newest stars in the industry as an alumni advisor with the GBTA Ladders and is an active member of his community, leading the recruitment committee for the Black Men's Travel Network and mentoring fellow boys of color currently attending his alma mater. That's fantastic, Paul. So lovely to have you here with us.
Appreciate you having me.
I'd like to now introduce to you Mpuga. Mpuga, so lovely to have you here with us, and you are speaking to us all the way from New York.
Yep, thank you for having me.
So, Mpuga was born in London. His name is from Uganda, East Africa, and he currently lives in New York. He works for Flight Centre Travel Group as a senior account executive and has more recently been appointed as the diversity ambassador for the Americas. Fantastic, fantastic achievement. Now, having worked both in the UK and the US markets within SME for over 10 years, he's managed to cultivate great relationship with both clients and suppliers. The journey of understanding and spreading his wings has been integral to him more recently within his role of D&I within the travel industry for Flight Centre. He's also the co-founder of a registered charity called Universal Chance, which aims to deliver ongoing projects that raise funds to improve the living standards of underprivileged children. The first project was actually to raise funds that were organized by a series of white-collar boxing events and fundraisers, such as marathons and climbing Kilimanjaro, with the objective of renovating a high school in rural Uganda. He's got a huge passion for traveling, and aside from working, he spent many of his lockdown period reading up on his next trip one day with his soon-to-be wife. He's actually in the midst of wedding planning with, oh, bless you, with the aims of tying the knot in mid 2021. So fantastic to have you with us here today.
Thanks, Devi.
And last but not least, AJ, welcome to D&I Talks, AJ.
Hi, Devi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me be on the call.
So AJ was born in Kampala, Uganda, and moved to the UK with his family when he was only 2 years old during the mass expulsion of the Ugandan Asians in 1972. AJ has two children who are both at university and constantly tell him that they are much more educated than he is. I'm sure they are. Leaving school at 18, AJ started work with the domestic high street banking, which then oversaw him progress into corporate banking in London. Now, unable to really resist that whole beast of sales with him in himself, he moved into sales within the card acquiring and commercial cards arena. Leaving the banking sector in 2002, AJ moved on to a major airline where he led the corporate sales team. After his tenure in airlines, he then moved into the hotel industry, holding various senior sales roles across two large global hotel chains in a period of 12 years, where he gained significant knowledge, not only in global hotel sales, but also in the franchising model, which is helping investors and owners realize hotel projects through due diligence studies. His journey then moved him towards technology in the travel industry and joined a major global travel technology company to acquire new and manage their top global accounts both in UK and India. Now, when AJ is not working, he can be found at the cricket ground, somewhere either watching or coaching, umpiring, or even playing the game itself. Although both his children, who have been playing cricket at home and abroad for school, county, club, and university, will tell you that he's not very good at anything to do with cricket, apart from the fact of having a few pints while he's watching the game. Well, that's fantastic to know. So, welcome to the show. And I think to just set the scene here, the topic is called Leading Through Allyship. And I just really wanted to share what the definition of ally really means to me, right? And for me, it basically means it's an individual who enjoys some privilege. And it's using that awareness to end oppression, right? And also using that to create inclusion and understand their own privilege. So I definitely don't think it's good enough for somebody to stand up and say, hey, I can be an ally, right? Because for me, the reality is you've not only got to show the behaviors, but you've got to be taking action, right? You've got to demonstrate those actions and to really sort of support real change amongst your colleagues and amongst your peers. Leaders can definitely help in this journey. And I think that's all about fostering a whole environment of inclusion and allyship. So that's for me where this whole piece comes in. So I guess it really aligns itself really well on to the very first question of allyship, right? Is you know, exploring that allyship can accelerate culture change. And Patricia, I think I'd like to start with you. How do you become an ally, in times of uncertainty and discrimination? What are help share your viewpoints with us here on this?
Yes, thank you for the question, Devi. For me, and this is one of the reasons why people start talking and embracing diversity and inclusion, it started with my personal experience, my personal career, and willingness to tackle the gender diversity agenda, the gender agenda. And from there also the LGBT plus, because I have great friends that I call family that are from the LGBT community and who I saw throughout the career suffering some discrimination. And after I jumped into the community, the D&I community, I started expanding this knowledge to the ethnicity, race, religion, and became aware of my own privileges as a white woman. And I started, for me, it started with awareness. by the time I understood my privileges, I started also seeing my own biases, and I became a better ally. So whenever, for example, I am a partner of the Hacking HR, which is an HR community, and we organize panels each 3 weeks, and we have to recruit panelists as well. And whenever I see that there is either too many women, too many men, there is no gender equality, there is too white or not a mix of religion, it's a no-go. And I have been taking this with me for everything that I'm doing. I have also the chance, I have a really good friend who is an amazing ally, a white male, cis straight. And he was doing also a podcast about self-preservation. And he was mentioning also about his awareness and conscious about his privilege.
Mhm.
And one of the things he said was, for instance, I know that the temperatures in the office are standardized and welcome the man in suit. And this was something that, wow, I never thought about it. And I don't know here, but for instance, I come from Brazil, and we always had major discussions about the air conditioning because it was normally freezing for the ladies, and it was a normal, and I never thought about that.
Right.
So such tiny things are privileges. And when we become aware of them, we become better allies. This is what I believe.
Yeah, and I think you've said it very well there, Patricia. Yeah, I'd like to come to you, Paul, next. Tell us your viewpoints, right? In terms of really what it means to you. Can't hear you, Paul.
Sorry about that. You mentioned, Devi, that a lot of times allies are someone that experiences or appreciates a certain level of privilege in a situation. And so that, to me, means someone that can stand up to anyone feeling underrepresented in a situation and speak up to not necessarily their position of power, but enhancing and using the power of allyship to provoke change. I think it really matters. The real matter is sharing a common basic principle and goal and standing by that, and putting in place procedures that allow everyone to feel represented in their environment and supported.
I really like that, Paul. You're saying of using your privilege of power to evoke change. I think that's so fundamentally important, right? And I think particularly, in this sector of, travel tech, hospitality, you could even talk about the wider sphere here, but that is so incredibly important when we talk about leaders. I mean, Evelyn, I'm going to come to you now. What's your reflection on this? You're on mute. Okay, well, right. We're going to move to Mpuga. Mpuga, I'm going to come to you with the question because Evelyn's dropped out. So tell us your thoughts on this and what it means to you.
Happy to discuss it. So I think in times of uncertainty, I think it's key to just stand up for marginalized groups and just really proactively build that inclusive environment. I think for a lot of people, it's easy to rely on kind of communication being like a key factor, since, that term is so vague. I just think it's important to understand what that communication should be and how it should be delivered, just obviously depending on the individual. And I think it's important to know, the audience, so the people that we're speaking to, and also the scenario. And, being a person of privilege or someone who's in a position of privilege, to know that they're actually a majority is quite important. And also, it's just not a bad thing in being an ally. It's not a bad thing to say to someone, I've got your back. I'm here to support you. And I'm here to amplify, because that kind of backing empowers people and just kind of reassures them that we're in this together. Being in a majority, it's important to kind of reiterate to that person who has a talent that I'm here with you, and we're going to drive this together, and this thought process is going to be collaborative.
That's really, really interesting, right? And I sort of take it from the point that actually everyone has the ability to be an ally, right? And
Mhm.
everyone has the ability to be an ally as privilege is intersectional. So what I mean by that is actually white women can be allies to people of color, right? Men can be allies to women, right? These are the intersections, right? People can be allies to members of the LGBTQ community, right? Able-bodied people can be allies to those with different abilities, and so on and so forth. So, Evan, I'm going to come to you now. So
Hope it
tell me
works.
what your take is on it.
For me, it's kindness. I mean, in its essence, allyship is being kind to other people and being respectful of them and listening to them and having an element of empathy and understanding what they're going through, because you can't judge a book by its cover. Like how someone looks, like, for example, I look like a white woman who is middle-aged and maybe is in a very privileged position in Sweden. But you wouldn't know about me is that I come from a minority group because I'm Jewish. My background is that I was raised by a single mother and I grew up in North London, which was very multicultural. And I understand about being with lots of other people and growing up with them and, learning about their cultures and being educated and listening and just generally understanding where they come from. And I think that in essence is what allyship is. It's just being kind and respectful to somebody else who's different to you. I think that the terminology sometimes can be a bit caught up with itself. It really is just being nice to somebody else who you would like to treat like they would treat you.
That's really a very sort of humbling way of putting it, isn't it? And isn't it a quote from Buddha, right? You treat others as you wish to be treated. That's one that actually my children learn in school. AJ, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, to start with, I think the whole panel has summed everything up really, really well. And to that point, I kind of agree with all of them. But I guess to add to that would be, as an ally, you first of all, I think you need to understand your own biases, your own privileges. First and foremost, you need to know what those are. Before you can do anything for anyone anyway. So that's first and foremost. And secondly, I think it's really important that rather than, for example, myself standing up saying, I am an ally or I want to be an ally, I think your actions should be such with people that they actually see you as the ally and want you to be their ally. And I think that is almost key rather than self-proclaiming that you're an ally.
Yeah.
Devi, you are on mute.
Devi, you're on mute.
Oh, there you go. It's my turn now. So, what I was saying is actually the first thing you said about understanding your own biases, that's fundamental. That's absolutely key in this piece here, right? When you talk about, because actually if you don't know what your biases are, I love it. There's a comment that's just come in from Anna there. A great example. Some people don't know who really need to be allies because not all dimensions of diversity are visible. And that's absolutely true, right? So it goes back to Evelyn's point there. Don't judge a book by its cover. And I guess alluding on to, a next question is, how do you, and this is a great transition from your answer, AJ, how do you understand your own unconscious biases, right? And don't forget, unconscious bias is just one aspect of the various multitude of biases that you have, but that you can look to change them in order to support being an ally, right? So, I mean, you could say show up, you could say speak up, you could say stand up. I'm just sort of summarizing this, right, as a generic example. Paul, what would you say for that?
I think it's a lot about embracing the knowledge of knowing that there is implicit bias and being able to address it as such and building processes that account for that. Like you said, if you're noticing practices that lead to biases, then there's ways of changing that. Maybe it's recruitment, maybe it's community events, maybe it's just a matter of taking the time to internally examine what you're doing and what we're doing as people to embrace diversity.
Sure. Does anybody want to add to that? Any thoughts, Patricia, that you may have, or Mpuga, did you want to add something?
Yes,
Happy to. Sorry,
Go.
Patricia, after you.
Okay, thank you. I really resonated with what Paul said, and for me also is awareness, but it's also looking to your surroundings. Be curious. For instance, one experience I had, I have been raised in a majorly Catholic country, even though we have several religions. And I have the opportunity to have another beliefs colleagues now. And one of the things I asked the person was if there would be anything that we could ask the company to have to make for you in your religion or in your belief more comfortable, or that you would feel you belong more, what would that be? And the person told me a prayers room. And I would have never thought about that.
A prayers room.
A prayers room.
Right.
And it's something so simple, but it's like that. For me, it was being curious and surrounding myself with different people than me. And for instance, I started checking my LinkedIn. I don't have many people from the Black community. How am I going to understand what is going on in the US, for example, with the Black Lives Matter? And I started connecting with people from the Black community to understand how is their pain, where is their suffering, what can I do to help? Or from the LGBT community, I started engaging in several groups from the community. So for me, it comes from the awareness and the curiosity.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? You say that, Patricia, because there's an element of actually empathy. There's a big element of empathy here, right? It's really trying to put yourself in the shoes of those individuals, right? Or those particular groups, whether it's underrepresented groups, whatever you want to call it, to try and better understand what they're going through, right? What are their struggles and what are their challenges, that they've had. And I think what's really interesting, particularly, and you've brought it up, right? With obviously everything that's happened in the summer, you've had last year the Me Too movement going on, you've had Black Lives Matter. What's really interesting is actually the take that people take from opting out of vital conversations about diversity and inclusivity because, they fear looking wrong, right? Saying something wrong, or being wrong, right? So there's that element on its own, and actually choosing your own comfort, and this is my own opinion, but choosing your own comfort over those hard conversations, is actually the epitome for me of privilege, right? Because it corrodes trust and it moves us away from having that meaningful and lasting change effectively, right? It goes back to what I sort of said right in our very first episode that I did. It's all about trying to have these conversations. They're going to be uncomfortable, right? You're not going to be comfortable because frankly, you're out of your comfort zone here, right? But actually, if you ask the question, that's the starting point, right? AJ, what are your thoughts, particularly from an ally point of view in supporting? So where you are, whether it is in your work environment or in a home environment, have you been in a situation where you could have done, with having an ally to support or vice versa?
Yeah, I think we could, in our, whether it's our personal lives or our work lives, we've all, I doubt if there's anybody that hasn't been through a stage in their life when they didn't need an ally or could have done with the support of an ally. But I think for me, the key is just going back a little bit to what you said in terms of, uncomfortable conversations. If the conversation, I think that if a conversation is uncomfortable, then there is real grit and meaning to that. And the fact that it's uncomfortable means that there may be an issue or something that needs resolving. So uncomfortable conversations, although can be uncomfortable, but there is meaning behind it, and there's a reason why it's uncomfortable, first of all. And secondly, when you're having that conversation, or not indeed just a conversation, but just generally going through whether you're an ally or need an ally, I think the most important thing, rather than speaking, is to listen. Listen, absorb, understand, and then you come up with potential solutions. But for me, allyship, the crux of it is to listen and to understand.
Yeah. Anybody else would like to add on to that?
I would say yes. Evie here. I'd like to say that you need to promote diversity in the fact that there's different people within the company who've got different points of view, they've got different celebrations, they come from different countries. And I think you need to kind of put them on your shoulders and show them that, they can be seen within a company. I think there's so many festivals and things that happen around the world locally that almost get forgotten about because people put their heads in the sand and wait until it all blows over, or they just kind of want to forget about it or just not really react to it. And I think that's a real shame. So when you have certain religious holidays, or if there's certain things happening around the world, it needs to be acknowledged. You can't put your head in the sand. And I feel that a lot of people have to have the courage to pull it out. And really look around from their surroundings and take it all in and actually promote what's going on and say that they have an element of inclusion into the country that they're in the fact that they're a local company or in a country, and then share it with other people, because that's the whole beauty of diversity. It's actually promoting and sharing what you know. And in my opinion, the fact that we're in this lockdown situation and everything that's been happening this year, we are going through a kind of workplace revolution and an employee evolution, where we're all looking internally and we're all trying to find out more about each other, hopefully through the internet. I hope it's not as polarizing as it has been, but more the fact that, like Patricia said, people are curious. They want to find out more on LinkedIn or on Instagram stories on what's going on around the world from other people. And the fact that we can do that is really a blessing, because the fact is we don't have any water coolers to gather around anymore, or to sit in a lunchroom and say, oh, what's that you're eating? And someone saying, oh, it's a Hamantaschen. And then someone saying, well, what's that then? And then talking about Hanukkah. That interaction has gone. So what do? We turn to the internet, and we have to be promoting within each other what our diversity is and the things that make us unique.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That looking at it from the take of, particularly now where we are in COVID times, and that impact, right, from a relationship point of view. So I'm going to come to you, Paul, and to you, Mpuga, because you gentlemen are in the US, right? So your lens is looking at things as slightly, they would be different to what's actually from an EMEA and even on an APAC point of view. But what I'd like to actually understand from each of you is, have you been in a situation recently, given the sort of what we've been through this year, where you could have done with an ally to support, right, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it comes down to having a voice heard and being able to have a platform to speak. I think a lot of times, especially here in the U.S., businesses and enterprises have not been built on a foundation of allyship, which they should. And I think that when building on a foundation of allyship, that allows for more freedom of thought and diversity in thought that I believe is valuable, both tangible and intangible, to organizations and societies. And without really understanding how to create that foundation of allyship, it's going to be difficult to see that change.
Doesn't that responsibility, I look at it, it's, leaders can take responsibility here, right? They have to take responsibility here, and across organizations. If I was looking specifically into, these organizations, I would say leaders can take responsibility for their attitudes and their behaviors, right? They, for me, as a leader, or if I was running an organization, you've got to educate yourself, right? First and foremost, you've got to be doing your own homework. You can't expect, your employee resource groups, which are are sort of, sprouting up everywhere, to be sort of feeding you the information, I would be turning around to a leader and say, take the time to listen, take the time to read, because this requires humility and it requires a sort of learning mindset. And Puga, what is your take on this?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Paul mentioned and also what you mentioned. I think, firstly, I would only expect an ally to be supportive for good reason. And that good reason is to, encourage equality and just promote the talent. But I have been in that situation. I think a lot of managers do like to employ new hires who remind them of themselves or people that they are familiar with. And it's often subconscious, and it's understandable to a degree because, they see eye to eye with that person straight away and they kind of hit it off. And if anything, that's kind of psychological safety. Seeing an employee that's more like them appears to be trustworthy because they think they know them better, which is understandable. But I do think that people who are a minority in senior positions in particular, they've got a huge role to play. I've experienced, that crab mentality before, in that, people feeling, especially people of minorities, if I can't have it, neither can he. And it happens with people who are minority in senior positions and who feel that they've reached that plateau and don't really want to look down or across at other people in the fear of their job being threatened. And it can often be masked as, the individual having a high ambition and no time for others. But it's actually because that minority in a senior position feels threatened, which shouldn't be the case, because we shouldn't have the mindset of a one in, one out policy when it comes to employees, particularly in the workplace. So I think we all have a role to play. And I think that it really is just a case of looking at the horizon and realizing, the people that you're working with and what their capabilities are when it comes to communication, really.
Thanks so much for that. And it's really insightful, isn't it? So if I guess I want to take this from a leadership point of view, right? And I can't think of anybody better actually, but AJ, in the role that you're in, right? In your role, what advice would you, and actually I'm going to ask each of you this question, what advice would you give to, leaders and taking it from your viewpoint, your lens, particularly now in the sort of space that we're in, on how they can make a difference, right? What are the sort of one or two takeaways that you could give to, a leader to say, right, actually you need to be doing this, this, and this to be a better ally to, the team? What are your viewpoints on that? And I'm going to come around to each of you on that.
Okay. I think first and foremost is, talk to your employees, talk to your teams, on a very informal basis, find out what is going on in their world, what is going on in their head, how do they feel about things, and don't do it in a sort of formal boss worker kind of way. But just have a good flowing conversation and find out what's happening in their world, digest, understand. And then once you've spoken to the team or a wide variety of people, then you'll start putting the jigsaw together in terms of pieces. And then, formulate some kind of strategy, but then go back to the employees and say, well, look, I've spoken to everybody. This seems to be generally how everybody feels. I just feel, open, honest, candid conversation is the best and foremost starting point that a leader can have.
That's brilliant, right? Because actually it's that summary of, listen, support, and self-respect at the same time, right?
And understand it.
Yeah. Evelyn.
Hello. So I would have to say that I would want leaders in every single company to take their heads out of the sand and to look around more and see what is happening in everyday situations and lives for their employees, as well as for their clients and as well as for them, because I feel that it's not just now, it's even 20 years ago, people really didn't want to pay attention. And I think now is the time. This is such an intense period of our lives that everyone is looking internally, and companies have to do the same. And it's now the time to, as Maya Angelou would say, have the courage to display empathy and have the courage to stand up for what they believe. And I think that a lot of companies don't do that strongly enough. And I think this is the time to do it. I think the 2020s is definitely going to be a cut point where people are really going to think about what they buy, who they buy from, what company they're going to be working with, and just kind of really taking stock of everything, because people have had the time to kind of, press stop on life and take a break and have kind of like a rethink. So now is the time to reset, and I think companies should really go forward with that.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the whole supplier chain piece is critical, particularly in the sort of the wider conversation, right? When you talk about diversity and what that actually means, because it's not just about the people, the sort of race element, the ethnic element. It's a wider scope here on this. Paul, what is your takeaway that you would want to sort of share with leaders today, or even in your own organization, right? To say, look, this is what needs to be done, or this is what you need to do better.
Right. Yeah, I think that our leaders need to approach allyship with a level of intentionality in order to bring about real change. We can't expect to passively beat implicit biases that have ruled our psyches for generations without taking meaningful and wholehearted steps towards bringing about equity and inclusion for everyone, right? Whether it's through a more transparent process, wider scale recruiting, training efforts. In my opinion, diversity leads to diversity of thought, which is a catalyst to creating and sustaining value.
Love it. Diversity leads to a catalyst of thought. I'm writing this down. I can't write fast enough. And I'm going to come to you, Patricia. Tell me what your thoughts are. You've got a lens of, you're not in the travel space. It's what's really interesting is you are in a consulting space, but you're an advocate of this area. So I'd really like to sort of gauge, what are your thoughts on this?
I am lucky to be consulting for this field, and from my experience, what I can say is if the leaders are not engaged, it won't happen. That's for sure. And my takeaway is we shouldn't just be talking about D&I because it's the right thing to do, and this I have been pretty strict in everywhere that I go. Because, for instance, there was one podcast one webinar that I attended, there were only 13% male representation. The rest was female. So how to engage this C-level, the C-suite, the male majority? For me, it's about business. How are you going to, for instance, in the travel industry? I have been to an experience in a hotel. Of course, the culture, it was a majority religious culture, and all the employees at the hotel were male. I didn't feel comfortable. So how are you going to talk to your customer if you don't have the proper representation? How are you many companies nowadays in the procurement, they only sell services or they only hire services from companies that have representation in their boards. So Goldman Sachs, for example, did that. Accenture is already doing that. So you are losing money. Companies are going to start losing business. So it's not just because it's the right thing to do, it's because it's the future. So which talents are you going to attract? Are you going to stop hiring the best talents because it's a woman or because it's Black or because it's Muslim? How many talents are we losing on it? So for me, that's the message. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the future.
Love it. It's not the right thing to do, it's the future. You can't sort of say it loud and clear enough, right? And Mpuga, what are your thoughts? Now, you've been in the UK, you're now in the US with Flight Centre Travel Group. You've recently been appointed in your role. I'd really like to get your take on, not necessarily where Flight Centre is, but your gauge on this. As an advocate of the space, where do you see and what advice would you be wanting to share with leaders right now as to, what they could really take away and how they can make a difference here?
So firstly, I agree with everything that Patricia, Paul, AJ and Evelyn have discussed. I do feel that if you are in a position of privilege or power within the workplace and you've got a voice to just amplify change, Firstly, reflect on your own blood, sweat, and tears that you went through to get to that position. But also as well, ultimately it's only right to credit yourself first, but also don't discredit others who try to walk down that same path, but don't see that same success. I think the opportunities and the chances that other people have had might appear to be the same as you, but the outcome of the opportunities and chances that they've had might not have had the same outcome. So we need to look at what has stunted the growth in people's career path. Has it been a result? Is it a result of discrimination? So I think that the more that we sort of amplify talent and encourage that kind of belonging, that's just going to break barriers and just empower people to do better collaboratively.
Fantastic. I mean, that's brilliant. And I would say, as a summary, for everything that you have all said today, in fact, I'm looking at the time and it's already 40 minutes in. We are pretty much out of time, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up here of what each of you have said, what I've taken as key takeaways that I will be sharing with the audience. Anna, you are hot on LinkedIn. So your comment here is being socially responsible is part of business too. You're absolutely right. We should start to change a little bit to discourse. Of course, there is a business case for D&I. At the same time, social justice is important more than ever, and we can finally see it. Consumers are more and more sensitive towards social justice. Yes, absolutely, they are. And I think this goes back to, the comment that Patricia made very earlier on. Evelyn made this as well. AJ, I mean, in fact, the panel have made this. It's not just the here and now. There's a supply chain element there. There's a consumer element here as well. AJ's comment from Allyship is really listen, support, right? Self-respect and understand. This is fundamental. Evelyn was treat everyone with kindness. Take your heads out of the sand. I love this. That's a takeaway for leaders, right? Realize what your employees are going through, because now is the time to display courage and empathy. Patricia talked about, leaders must be engaged to make this happen without a shadow of a doubt. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's the future. Paul, you talked about, using your privilege of power to evoke change, right? Being intentional takes it's all about meaningful work, and it's all intentionally done. And Mpuga, from your perspective, it's about lifting others by encouraging and advocating, right? Equality and promoting growth opportunities. And I've got to say, to finish, a true ally must regularly listen to those around, right? Those around them. They've got to adopt their thinking. That's how I see it. Rework what they believe in, and to be correct and be comfortable being uncomfortable. It goes back to this piece all over again. Yes, it's unique, and it's a challenging journey. That's how I do see this. But remaining an ally, right, is definitely one worth taking. So with that, I'd like to thank my amazing panel that here today. We can't talk more about diversity than looking at this panel here today. I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. This is the last diversity and inclusion talks that I'm doing. To look back of any of the other 5 episodes, you can find all the details on the link that you see here on the screen below. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'd like to thank the panel again. Wish you all well, and please stay safe. Take care for now.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.